So what I find amazing, right, is you can go to anywhere in the world, okay, no matter what country you're in, what nationality someone is, what religion they are, and you can connect to them on a human level, aka serving them, loving them, food and drink, and they feel just like family. And yet you could go across your road to your neighbour, and you could feel so distant from them, and that just makes me feel so connected, even though I'm not connected with, say, people around me. That there's people in the world, for example, like you, on the same level of consciousness, that you can just reach out to and connect, and that makes me feel great.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's very interesting how we all sort of share similar things. I think like in history, people try to find more differences between themselves rather than similarities, because there's this tribalism embedded in our nature. You know, we sort of naturally organize ourselves in groups, you know, of this is yes, this is no, this is good, this is bad. We sort of try to have a flock that we belong to. When in reality, you know, research has shown that we are more similar than we are different. You know, the biology, there are differences between men and women, for example, from the biology, but there are virtually no differences between races, which is something that people have tried to disprove for long periods of time. Lots of historical calamities happen because of that. So we are more similar, and we should appreciate that. We should try to connect with each other. There's actually very interesting research. I don't know if I should lead with this. You know, I feel like I'm talking so much already, but it's
Jesus
just.
Christ, we've already done 2 minutes, just talk.
Well, the reason why I sort of decided to mention this is you started talking about similarities, and there's this research that I read not too long ago, which was sort of done on a similar notion. The research was made by, I think, two very prominent psychologists. One was Ryan Deci, the other one was, I think, Ken and Sheldon. And the research was to find like what are the fundamental human needs, right? Like despite our differences in culture, in our race and gender, are there a set of needs that every human being on this planet shares? And it seems like there are fundamental needs that people have regardless of you know their differences, and those are relatedness. So we want to have this sort of feeling of intimate connectedness with somebody else, whether that would be physical or emotional. We want to feel understood. We want to relate to other people. The other one is what is called autonomy. So this feeling that you're the boss of your life. You are in charge of your life. You're living your life the way that you want to live it. And the third one is what is the word? I forgot the English word for it, but I think it's like the
Say the
feeling
English
that.
word.
That's the thing. I forgot what the English word sounds,
Oh,
but I
you
can
forgot
describe
the
it to
English
you.
word.
Yes. The it's essentially feeling capable. What you do, competence. That's the word that I was looking for. It's the feeling of competence, feeling able in whatever your endeavor, in whatever you do. It's also something relates to this notion of flow. If you ever heard that term. So
Yeah,
it's
absolutely. Flow
this
state.
the flow state, exactly. It's the state when you're in, when you are capable at what you're doing, but the complexity is just slightly above your level, which keeps you engaged. So we want that as well. The fourth one, technically in the theory, they've defined three, but I think there are actually five in total, some further research that they've done. So the fourth one would be self-esteem, which is kind of self-explanatory. People want to feel, you know, worthy and good about themselves. But what's interesting about self-esteem is that it seems like you get that as a bonus if all the other aspects are in order. So if you've got your autonomy right, if you've got your competence right, if you've got your relatedness right, self-esteem seems to be there. But if one of these is missing, your self-esteem seems to be out of order as well. And the fifth one is security, I'd say. So everybody wants to feel safe. It's hard to be happy if you've got bombs dropping around, or if you have to think about where your next meal is going to come from, or where you're going to sleep, right? So I think these five probably unite every single human being on this planet. And when you think about people's intrinsic motivations and what they are, why do we do things, and what really sort of motivates us to act in a certain way, I think oftentimes you can probably trace it down to one of these five criteria that people are trying to fulfill.
Yeah, that's the thing. You can take those five things, right, and go anywhere in the world, any human, right, and you can connect with anyone. And yet people always focus on the differences. It's like the more differences there are, the more people see differences, and the more they see differences, they're more focused on the differences. And so you're just going to create more and more and more of the things you don't want. And there could be like 7 things you don't get on with somebody about, and yet 3 things that you do, right? Encouraging them to be confident, or just complimenting them, even if you don't think they look nice, just doing things like that makes them feel good. And yet that person is now kind of surrendered to you, that you're not a threat, and they open themselves up. For example, do you want some food? Do you want some drink? And you just start to serve each other. And when you look at everywhere, no matter what country you're in, it always seems to be the same thing. Everyone sees a human, and rather than like welcoming them, they are distant from them. And when I say everyone, I don't mean every single human. Of course, there is humans, but the perspective of how more people are negative than positive. Most people, they seem to not want to get to know other people because they're familiar with their friends that they already know. And it's a big shame because there's so many people, like there were so many stories that you'd realize you connect to everyone, or so many people. Even if you don't know who they are, there's always going to be a connection. And just connecting on one thing out of many that you don't will make you feel good. We're pack animals. We're used to being around like loads of other chimps. Cave days around the cave, for example. Even if you look at cows and birds, they all hang together. Penguins and dolphins and donkeys, every single race, they all hang together. Right? Even lions, they hang together before one goes off to find a mate, type of thing. But everything is about connection and feeling, as you said, secure with other people. Being in charge, that thing about in control of your life. There's people are always trying to become charge of the pack or the leader of the group. So yeah, all these traits are in everything. And if you understand energy, energy is about attracting all the weak, all the smaller energies into one. Essentially, you become that big, powerful energy that can absorb and attract all the weak energies. You look at animals, there's always a leader that wants everyone else to follow them. I mean, you look how life is structured in terms of governments, and how we're supposed to be following the government in terms of following the leader of the pack. That's the only way it can be, but there's too many people now, and the government can't, no matter what country you're in, the governments can't manage all these people. Like, government is the leaders one. You've got your cabinet and your ministers, I don't know, say 50. Then you've got the Commons and the House of the Lords and everyone who runs different states. Let's just say 400. But population is going from like 30 million to 40 million to 50 million to 60 million. And yet you still got like only 50 people like running the country. And so you can't follow somebody who is out of alignment with your beliefs. You know, a tribe and a government has come from a belief system of that tribe. And then as you grow, more people become part of the tribe and it becomes a country. But yet there's so many people, we're so focused on so many other things, and we're looking at stuff online in other countries' beliefs and cultures, that one person is trying to say do this. It's just non-existent. It's nonsense. And I think because of all this, we'll go back to local tribes again, almost like small states, running our own kind of miniature cultures, like the vegan state. Then you've got the spiritual state. Then you've got the drug state. and then you've got the black state or the ginger state or the bikers state or the Xbox Live state, just local people hanging around with people who are like-minded, even if it's just in one way. As I said, if you find one thing in common with someone, then now they're part of your pack. What's your thoughts on that?
I think that this is already happening. It's just maybe it's not happening in the physical world, but in the digital world. I mean, look at what we've got on the internet. We've got so many communities where people can find, as you said, people that can relate to, the groups that they can relate to. You can find a subreddit for pretty much anything these days. So I think people are already belonging to a multitude of groups. They can identify themselves, and maybe people are starting more to think about, well, which groups do I want to belong, especially if those groups aren't available to you physically. Like, chances are you're not very likely to find I don't know, spaghetti painting group in the place where you are, but chances are you will find somebody who likes to do that online, and people are using that. I think the danger for that comes when these digital places they start getting targeted by say malicious groups or entities, because we are more programmable than most of us would like to believe. For example, if you would ask I don't know, my 60-year-old auntie or my grandma, why does she believe in something that she saw on TV? She probably wouldn't be able to really tell her assumptions from the facts, because we like to believe people. There's a range of biases that are in our heads that lead to false ways of thinking, which lead to mistakes. And I think the problem is that we're not really taught at school how to distinguish what is, how to find truth. I guess that's the way, how to look at the world at its complexity, and instead of being scared by it and then falling back to some sort of assumption or false belief, instead sort of take this information and try to use reason to really find some truth in it, and help ourselves and help other people. So in that regard, I'd say, we've got this sort of wonderful freedom of connecting to anybody in the world, and exploring our deepest selves, and finding people we can relate to across countries. But at the same time, it becomes a risk when people start to, I guess, use those communities and spread misinformation, spread their own agendas, and try to militarize those. And I think we've seen those, like, instances of that happening not too long ago, and for quite a few times actually.
Do you think that you said that you can almost find any type of group you want online? That's true. You can make a Facebook for spaghetti painters, right? But at what point does all the online groups come into reality? So people start building cities and small towns where they're just of spaghetti painters, or a new village that are just of vegans and they grow their own vegan crops, or there's a village of just black people, or a village of art biker people. At what point does all these groups online manifest into the real world? And rather than being in a city with loads of other people, different cultures, races, religions, and whatever, old people, young people, at what point do they just become solely your belief system? So a town of Christians, town of Muslims, towns of bikers, towns of vegans. Is that possible? Like, for example, you buy a place and there's a house up for sale next to you, and you call your friend and you say, "Oh my God, there's a house for sale. You should definitely come and buy it." So imagine they're both vegan. So you got two vegans in the same street, and now they all know other vegan people. So now when another house is for sale, they say, "Hey, you should come and live over there and meet my vegan friend." So they've got three vegans living in the same street, and you could see how eventually other people would start to move out because they don't feel the same as their neighbors. and that they want more of the same people living in that street. So now you've got a street of vegans, a street of, it's almost like you've got Mexican street, Indian street, African street, English street in one country, because I don't think that countries are going to really exist. Like, you've got too many humans that establish their territory, call it a country, and now everyone's migrating from other parts of the country to live on one part of the earth, which is called, say, a country. But that country isn't a country anymore. A country is like a tribe that's grown. A few Mexican people, let's call it Mexico. A few Nigerians, let's call it Nigeria. But now everyone's living in everyone in a, every country is mixed. No one's a pure dog anymore, pure pedigree. They're mixed. They're a Jackapoo or a Great Dane, a Golden. You know what I mean? Everyone's breeding. So really, countries can't be countries because this is Mexico, a soil, but you're Filipino and Nigerian. You're Irish and Scottish and Mexican. So, what are you? Are you Mexican or are you Scottish and Irish? You can't be like, you can't be both. Like, you're a citizen of Mexico, but your blood is of Scottish and Nigerian. So what are you? So eventually it's going to be like, no country's going to be a country. It's just going to be like, as you said, one world government of just certain laws are going to be the same. And we all eat everyone's food anyway. We all watch the same stuff on TV. Everyone's mixed. So there's going to be like Mexican street, vegan street, African street, biker street. I mean, it has to be like that because, like, for example, different towns, you argue with other people based on beliefs. And there's just arguments rather than argue and fight over you shouldn't have your fence panel up because my fence panel was disapproved by the council, or my dogs are better than your dogs, pit bulls versus Jack Russells. They're just going to stop arguing, move out, and then people with also pit bulls will move in. I honestly see that happening. Like, it's bound to happen.
I think I think it can happen. It does happen, but I don't think it's a solution. I think it's a solution to a non-existent problem, maybe, because if you start moving and trying to find your village, the one that best define you, well, that's a very difficult question indeed. Like, what does really define you as a person? And then that's another problem, is that you have to be very specific, right? Like, can you have a village that is, I don't know, Asian vegan people, or is it just vegan people that you're looking after? At what point do you stop filtering? At that point, it becomes really, really complex. But it does happen. I mean, I'm not saying all of these instances are like that, but that's how a lot of cults really start. I've recently watched actually a documentary on Netflix about cults, and I don't remember the exact name of the cult, but it was quite big in the USA. And actually,
what was the Netflix thing called?
So there's a series called Explained, and it's a wonderful series. I really recommend watching it. There's an episode on cults specifically, like how do you define a cult, and then different examples in history of how they work, what are their tactics. And apparently you can really, there's clear set of say not rules, but like, I guess, a clear way to define when you're dealing with a cult, right? And they actually managed to get a plot of land in Africa where they've established their own sort of town. And that's another thing that you want to do as a cult, right? You want to isolate your members so that they're not part of the real world, right? They're just isolated. No, they weren't African. I don't. Well, maybe some of them were, but I think the majority of them were U.S. citizens.
So they just bought some land in Africa.
They bought some land and they built a little town there, and they just all moved there.
So you literally can buy land in anywhere of the world and just sort of go out there and just, as long as you don't get caught, just live on that land. Let's just say their government's weak and they don't enforce, like, do you own this land and stuff, or you shouldn't be sleeping here because it's not suitable because there's no toilet, for example. Can you just do that?
I think so. Yeah, it depends on the country, of course. Like, you probably wouldn't be able to do that in certain Western countries because of immigration rules. But in other parts of the world, where land is cheap, I suppose governments are more than welcoming people from the West just coming in and buying their land.
That is very interesting. So yeah, this thing, if you look at energy, right, it always attracts like the smaller energies to become one, right? And you can see how what people are doing with their different belief systems, they're trying to attract other people on the same sort of vibe, same frequency, same belief system to become one. So all the vegans, all the blacks, or the gingers, or the bikers, whatever, right? When you look at it in terms of physical, that's like trying to get squares, triangles, and circles, filter out all the circles so they all go into one circle, all the squares go into one square, and all the triangles go into one triangle. But there's so many different shapes, and and everyone. Do you know what I'm trying to say? The energy, it would make sense because you just go into the same thing. You know, a vegan would go into a vegan, right? But a vegan is a person, it's a physical thing, and you can't have just simply vegan goes into vegan, because you could have a vegan Mexican and then a vegan person is who likes sport, and the other vegan person doesn't like sport. So you kind of match, but you don't match. So you would attract, but then you would repel. So this concept stuff that you don't, but that's not how it works. It just simply won't work. Like, you could have a village full of mainly vegans and mainly biker people, but there's always going to be a biker who's gay, or a vegan who secretly snacks on a bit of steak because they're not really a vegan. They just do it for health reasons rather than other reasons that vegans do it for. So again, if it's not possible in terms of the physics of it, but it's possible in energy, it means that it isn't actually possible. And we're trying to do it. Everyone's trying to sort of connect with people that only suits their narrative, like with politics and stuff, and pushing aside the human side to them. And it's only ending in war and arguments. So essentially, what will happen is that people will try and find people on their frequency and their vibe, and there'll be a war, and we'll all fight and kill each other because there won't be enough police to stop it. Almost like, for example, in Syria, for example, when the government don't change their ways, all the Syrian people, they pipe up, and then there's missiles shooting down buildings and shit. Eventually, there won't be enough government to control the people, that the people will sort of gain control, and then they'll fight other people, and then a lot of people will die, and then you'll be left with like half a village left. And because people have seen what war can do, they will simply just stop fighting, and they'll love. And because there'll be less people, there'll be less belief systems. So you're more likely to get on with somebody. And then it will just start again. It's almost like Australian wildfires. Loads of trees. Okay. Too many trees are built. There's just too many trees. So now what the universe does is it sets them alight or whatever through the sun, burns them all down, and it all starts again. It just seems to be that's what life is. There's too much of something and it gets taken away. Too many humans, flu. Too many trees, fire. Um, too many bats in a cage, the flu spread. You see, it just seems to be this thing about how there's too much of something. The universe has a way of limiting it. Too many
Yeah.
belief systems, you'll all fight because you don't agree, and there'll just be a few left. You know?
Well, in biology, there is this concept of homeostasis, which is like an organism's tendency to regulate back to sort of the normal state, you could say. So, for example, like a good example in the human body would be body temperature. If you get cold, if your body temperature drops, you get shivers, you know, your hair raises. If you're too hot, you start sweating. It's all just to sort of bring it back to the normal. In statistics and in finance, there's also a notion of regressing to the mean, meaning that extreme events usually sort of get back to normal as well. So that's probably going to the point of what you said, where when too much of a thing sort of causes some sort of a disturbance or some sort of an extreme event, and things then sort of get back to normal, I guess. But I guess my main point would be I would go back to what we were discussing before that, which is diversity, I think. So the point there that if correct me if I'm wrong, by the way, I'm trying to make sure I understand you. the point you're trying to make is that people are trying to sort of congregate into these tribes and find similar people to themselves, which can cause havoc. I think in a way you're right. I don't know how feasible it would be to do on a massive scale. Like imagine if everybody now starts finding their niche. I think it's impossible. What we have tried to do and what we're doing is sort of find the best alternative to it. You know, because at the end of the day, we need to have some sort of systems that connects us. You could say, you know, there are layers to how connected you are. So, for example, your closest circle would be your family. You know, these are the people that are the closest to you, that you know the best. Then outside that, be your, you know, your closest friends. Then maybe your next closest friends, etc., etc., until you get your, I don't know, maybe your school, your job. Then you get your maybe your city, and then your country, right? And then at the very top, you've got your race, you know, your planet. So in that sense, we're all connected because we all belong to the same species, right? But I do agree with you that it's not feasible to really try and congregate in these sort of niche villages that try to describe one or two aspects of your personality, simply because your personality is just too diverse to really represent what you are. And also because there are clear benefits to diversity, right? If anything, we sort of benefit from having people with a different frame of reference, with a different outlook. And we should encourage people to bring their views, you know, to challenge ideas. I think what we're really missing in our society is ability to hold a good debate, right? It's something that we're not taught at school. And when you don't have a skill to sort of let go of your emotion when you're discussing a topic, things can get heated up really quickly. I mean, like probably one of the reasons why we're not discussing politics or you know, some of these hot topics is because they can be very challenging for people to hear. And when somebody hears a view that opposes theirs, it can cause something that's called a cognitive dissonance, which is when you can hold two opposing views that you can sort of agree, and you're not sure what to do. So you have to sort of, you know, get rid of one because it actually causes you physical discomfort, right? So a lot of times when that happens, people sort of they fall back to either some sort of a bias or a traditional assumption or whatever is like the safest option to hold. You know, if that would be your view that the Earth is flat because, you know, 17th century Europe, you'd probably refer to that because that's like the safe and proven, even though the facts may actually show you something else. So there's a risk in that if you don't challenge your own assumptions, if you don't really try to find the truth and make sure that your understanding is as close to reality as it can be, then you risk on believing that the Earth is flat and probably sits on top of some sort of a turtle, right? Which really limits the options that you've got in life, right? So I think it's a necessary skill that people are not really taught, and it would really, really, like, if there's one skill that could probably benefit humanity vastly, is the ability to listen to someone's opposing view and then sort of reason with fact, leaving emotion outside. But unfortunately, humans find it difficult. I think most humans, we were driven by emotions. So it's hard to really let go of them, especially when they play such a huge part in our survival. I mean, at least they have. That's another problem in that our biology evolves way, way slower than our societies do. You know, when we think about the human body, and especially our brains, we're running on very old hardware. Like our software is it can be brand new. We've got all these facts about Earth and solar system and physics, etc. Based on science and scientific achievements throughout all of these years. But our biology is still the same. It hasn't changed a single bit, really. So when we're dealing with opposing views, we still have to account these primal instincts that are still there, whether that would be fight or flight, whether that would be some sort of a relatedness, effect of a group of tribalism, because you want to sort of relate to people, because in the past that would mean that you are more likely to survive. Like you need to understand all of these quirks of your body and how they can actually impede your reasoning and thinking process and make you a bit dumb when you're making these decisions, when you're listening to someone, because otherwise you'll be just falling back on something that it has been known. Like everybody does it this way, but it doesn't mean that it's this way. You know what I mean?
If you study cultures, right, they've literally gone from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 to 7 to 8. So it's just been constant evolution, keep adapting, right? It's almost like laws. If somebody says takes a mick out of a trapper, you make spins, and you put disabled, danger, so prejudicism, right? Then they add things, government add things, right, to protect people so people can't get offended, for example. But there's going to become a point where every time somebody's offended, you can't just keep adding that new law into place. You can't just keep, it's almost like if you keep building up in the sky, eventually it's going to start to topple. There's going to become a point where, as I said, we've all kind of just evolved. We've gone from like houses with no heating, and now we've got houses with heating, and then we've got houses with aircon, and then we've got everything has evolved and it's kept going forward. I think we're at not the end, because as I said, it will go back around like Bitcoin. It will go up, then it'll go back around. We're at the end of how life has always been. So the government stays the same, as I said. Population gets bigger. It can't just keep getting bigger. You can't keep governing, creating new laws for people, getting more police, funding hospitals and the NHS because there's too many sick people. That's not the issue. It's not the people, not enough nurses, or there's not enough money. It's too many fucking people, right? And when you think over time about how the war killed so many people and the flus of the past killed so many people, and just go back in time of natural things like tsunamis and storms and tornadoes, and they've killed millions in the Philippines and stuff. Well, think about how many animals would have died from the storms and flus that we didn't even know about, right? And how many humans that have died. Obviously, we are human. We connect to those humans. You think, poor humans. And they are dying of natural causes and flus and bacteria stuff that we have no idea about. Like, you come across a dead bird, then you don't know why that dead bird died. For all you know, it had a certain disease. But there's a way of universe creating and then sort of deleting and starting again. In terms of humanity, I see everything sort of going towards where it is now. People going to ask the government for change because only they can make change. The government keep trying their best to make change, create new laws, lower taxes, fund health service. They're doing their best until you get so pissed off with them and how they can't change. No fault of their own. You can't look at your house and see a pothole and think, oh, bloody Donald Trump, why isn't he fixing that pothole? That's just not how it works. But people are going to get so pissed off with the lack of change and dependency on others to do things financially, emotionally, physically, sexually. This need for a girlfriend, a wife, a family, the need for a big house, the need for the new iPhone, the need for changing government, the need for this. People are just going to give up. They're just going to surrender to themselves and give up and just grow their own food in the garden. Go and ask their neighbour for some help. Get some cement and fill that pothole. They're just going to become independent and just do it themselves, waiting for the government to cut the grass, for example, because it's too long. You'll just think, fuck it. I'm not illegally allowed to go cut that grass. I'm just going to cut the grass. And people are going to start just to take control of their lives. As you said, one of the human needs is to take control and feel empowered. They're going to stop relying on other people, supermarkets for the food, this new iPhone, and they're just going to start doing it themselves. And everything's going to become localized. So it's not going to keep going where we're going to start reaching out from Facebook groups of spaghetti painters and vegan and black people. And then we're going to have cities of black people and Mexicans and vegan people and Republicans and Democrats. It's not going to work like that. It's going to do a circle. It's going to do a circle. It's going to come back around, almost like a roly-poly, right? Where we're going to sort of stop seeking out and seek within and sort of think, okay, what actually means the most to me in my life? Yes, I want more money. Yes, publican, vegan, fucking bike people, but what actually matters the most? And it all comes down to the basics, that community, that connection to the animals, for example. So you're just focus on your 4 neighbours, go and ask if they need help, cut their hair. She's a beauty therapist, she'll cut your nails, you'll cut her grass, he's a painter. So now you'll all trade local services, and you'll say, look, I'm doing a massive spaghetti bolognese, would you like some? Yes. Tomorrow I'm doing a massive lasagna. Yes. I'm creating my own beer. Actually, I've got some lettuce so that you can have. And you'll feel such a sense of community with just 5 people. Essentially, it's that 5 members of your family, but it'll just be the local people that you'll stop seeking online for this connection. You'll just create connections locally rather than I want somebody who's an Xbox vegan fucking black person. You'll just be like, yep, well, at the end of the day, I didn't know an Xbox vegan black person existed if there wasn't online stuff, but I do know my neighbour likes football. And I like football. He might not be black, he might not be vegan, he might not be a biker person. When I speak to him about good life, so now we'll reach out to the local things we can see. We won't worry about the wars in other countries and the wildfires in other countries and the flu in other countries because, yeah, in terms of humanity, you feel for people because you see their pain and it can easily be in you. But we're worrying about stuff that has nothing to do with us that we can't see. If you're there, help. But if you're not there, focus on your life because it becomes a point where you're putting 2 before 1. It's making 1 unhappy. You want to save the whole world. Why isn't the government doing this and making flu jabs for all these people? And you're so unhappy. And you could go for a nice walk with your friend right now and enjoy life. 1 before 2. And when you're happy, you could take a trip to Australia and start rebuilding the community of wildfires if you wish to. But people are doing 2 before 1, they're becoming unhappy. We are going to go from putting 2 before 1, and it's going to be fuck this. I'm putting myself first. And they will start to do things that make them feel good. And they won't seek this change in government, this change in the world, because you'll realize it's not possible to change every human's life. Like every tree on this planet, every cow on this planet, every bird on this planet. You can't save all the birds, save all the trees, save all the cows. You can't save all humanity. It's just not how it works. As much as you want to help people, you want to help as many people as possible, you can't help people. They have to help themselves. And you help yourself, help the people around you, and they help themselves over there, and they help people around them. Almost like those crops, those like alien crops. You look down, there's always like a circle of crop, and then a circle over here, and a circle here, and a circle here. You go on Google Maps, you see like all the trees, they're always equally spread out. Why is that? Why are all the crop circles the same distance? Why are all the kind of the trees always the same distance? That's because they dominate around themselves. That basically they take what they need around them, and that's all they need to grow. That trees are not worrying about other trees in another country. We're worrying about other people in other countries. We need to worry about around ourselves because that's enough. That tree is enough to grow with just the 5 meters around him. We have enough around us. We can grow food. A little village they can grow carrots. You can grow sweet corn. I can grow lettuce. You can grow apples. That's enough to trade. That's enough to enjoy your life. You don't need all this other shit around the world. It's becoming too complicated. Too complicated. Too many trees in the same field fighting for the same nutrients. What happens? One tree dominates, the rest die. What happens? Too many humans in the same city, Wuhan. Everyone gets the flu and dies. Too many people in hospital. They're coughing and spluttering. Too many people die. It's just science and nature. And you can't... Man's trying to play God. Isolate everyone to stop the flu from spreading. Unfortunately, flu's going to spread. There's always going to be another flu. Something else. So now you're trying to save all humans.
There's
Just off what?
so many things that you've touched out. I'd like to sort of discuss, and I'm trying to, I guess, pull everything into a single narrative at the moment, which might be a bit tricky. But I'll start with this. So you mentioned this sort of culture of complaining and the victimhood culture that I agree. There's definitely a lot of that at the moment. So people not taking responsibility of their own life and just expecting that somebody will come in and sort their problems, which is sad. And I do really hope that we'll get to the point where we'll have conscious consumption as well, because that's part of it. You don't want to just take things for some reason because that advertisement has said so, or because your friend has that. You're going to start consuming because you actually need it, because you want it, right? You want it for some intrinsic reason, because it makes you feel good, for example, right? But the thing is that it's very hard to track these things. It's hard to understand whether it's something that you actually need and you actually like, or has that in your head by the advertisement. There's actually a really good documentary which I really recommend. It's called The Century of Self. It's by Adam Curtis.
It's in Netflix.
Uh, I'm not sure, but it's definitely on YouTube. There's the full documentary is on YouTube, and in the documentary, Adam provides just a spectacular story of how our society, the Western society, and especially the society in the United States, has been shaped throughout the 20th century to create these observant, complacent consumers, because they are the sort of driving force of the economy. If you've got people who buy things, even if those things aren't really necessary for them, you're sort of creating value out of thin air. That means that you can create a pet rock and sell that for $20. When in reality, nobody probably needs a pet rock. They probably need a real. But
a pet
but
rock.
but there's this sort of trade-off. We need to adjust to this sort of change. People would have to, as you said, take responsibility in their own life, and instead of expecting somebody else to sort of come in and save the day and then fill in the gaps in their happiness by buying things, or by trying to make themselves feel better by getting that new iPhone or that new Rolex. They would have to figure out what really is important to them, and what do they want to do. And I really like what you mentioned about the fact that you can't save the world. I think you're right in a way that people often start with the world when their own feet are on fire. I don't know if there's a saying like that in the US, like your own feet are on fire and you're trying to sort of extinguish someone else's house. Start with your feet, extinguish them, and then go on and help others. I don't know if you're familiar with Jordan Peterson. He's a very controversial guy these days, but he's a psychology professor at the University of Toronto. And I really like what he said about this subject, essentially, which he has a quote, which is, "Clean up your room." It's a very simple quote, but what it means is that you should start with something, like with the immediate area that surrounds you. Before you go and save the world, clean up your room, clean up the mess in your life, sort out yourself so that you could then help others and sort out their lives. And the thing is that oftentimes people actually forfeit this first step. They go like, oh, actually, I'm going to feel better about myself. I'm going to save myself by saving the world. But that's usually not how it works. It's really hard to, stop someone else from dying of bleeding when you're bleeding yourself. You need to make sure that your own health is in place and is there. That's why actually when you're flying, the first thing that they tell you is that in case of an emergency, the masks will drop. and you should first put on the mask on yourself before you start putting the mask on other people, right? And this is very important, because if you lose consciousness, you can't help anyone. So you have to start with yourself. So I do hope that we will sort of get a bit more conscious about what we consume, what we want, and why do we want that. And a good place to start is by analyzing what do you want to get, like what do you want to buy and why, right? Why do you think that will make you happy? Because there's a lot of things that people assume will bring them happiness, when in fact there's a lot of research it won't, which was a very big surprise to me, for example. So I don't know, do you want to hear it? There's a few facts. So I'm going to give you a few questions, and you tell me if you think that this gives long-term happiness or not. So do you think that status brings happiness to people?
If you believe it does, then yes, but when it comes down to it, no.
That's correct. I think in studies they've found that empirically achievement does not really contribute to long-term happiness. Same goes with beauty and actually money as well. So what really contributes to long-term happiness is actually these 5 things that I've mentioned earlier, which is your relatedness, your sense of autonomy, and how much self-esteem you've got, and how competent you feel in your life. And at the same time, you've got this sort of precondition that you've got security, because it's hard to really achieve relatedness and competency when, again, you've got the bombs dropping or you've got famine. So I think people would be very rewarded very much if they would actually start thinking from that perspective of, well, what are the immediate things that I can do to sort of really improve my relatedness, my sense of autonomy and my competence. And there's a lot one can do, even in pretty difficult situations. I think one thing that we should always be really aware of is like the effect of birth lottery, which is a term that I've learned recently. I don't know if you heard about it.
No, what is it?
Birth lottery refers to essentially things that you take for granted, and you kind of just assume that most people have it. So for us, it could be like education, right? Knowing how to read and write. Being born in a Western country is also birth lottery. So when you have all of these small things sort of accumulate into a much better starting point for many people. So that's why some people, you get people who can understand how you get all these famines and you get all these wars in third world countries. Like, why do they keep on fighting? Why can't they just collect themselves and start working productively to really elevate themselves? Well, you're looking at it from perspective that you won the birth lottery. You live in a society which is peaceful, which promotes maybe literacy, and you've got the chance to educate yourself, to find a job where you don't actually have to fight someone for food, etc. And only when you actually go there and you live there for an extended period of time, when you actually get a sense of what the situation is there, can you actually make some sort of claims about what the world should be like. So you definitely need to be aware of again, your own biases and things that you may take for granted before you can actually start saving the world. So my advice would be, and this is again something that I've tried to incorporate in my life as well, trying to be more, I guess, conscious of your family and friends. Try to connect with people that you actually enjoy spending time with, and it's kind of, it may sound hard, but when you think about it, I like to think about positive emotion. So you've got these people that you just communicate with, and after almost every time you spend with them, you just feel better. You feel good. People that you want to really maintain the contact, you want to improve the contact, and these aren't necessarily even your family members. In fact, it could be that your family members are toxic, and they're the opposite of what I've just described. They're bringing you down. They are bringing the worst out of you. And I think what's important is to understand that it is okay to distance yourself from toxic people, even if they're your family. It's worthwhile, of course, to try and fix things if things can be fixed. But if there's some sort of a chronic issue, and people really are not looking to change or their behaviors, then the best thing that you can do is to sort of distance yourself, because what you eat come. If you spend your time with negative people who bring the worst out of you, well, you're gonna have the worst brought out from you, and it's really hard to save the world in that state. Another thing that you can do is to increase your competence. You can think about things that really put you in this sort of state of flow, when time almost stops and you're doing something, whether it would be like painting or making music or coding. Time really just flies, and you're getting this sort of, I wouldn't say it's enjoyment, it's almost like peace. You're so entrenched in what you're doing that time just flies, and you can keep on doing that. It's if you have an activity like that, it's a good indication that it's something that you should investigate further, and maybe think of how you can maybe potentially develop this into a career of some sort, because you will be rewarded for that. And for autonomy, well, it really depends on each person. But in the truest sense of it is, living life the way that you want to live. And when you think about life from that perspective, you need to think about what false rules have I set in my life that are blocking me from doing what I really want to do. So, for example, I know a lot of people who, for example, started, studying for a medical degree or like a law degree because their parents sort of forced them into doing it. And then once they do it, then they find all sorts of excuses to justify keep on doing that, when maybe in reality they would be better off, I don't know, maybe even dropping it and becoming a really good, passionate painter than a really sad and miserable lawyer, if you know what I mean. But of course, it's scary to think about these things. Most people wouldn't be ready to just drop their successful or high-paying jobs and chase their passions. I don't encourage people to do that. I think what you can do in this case is approach this with some sort of like a experimental attitude, where you do the smallest change possible and then see what results you get. So in the case of the painter, right, you don't have to drop your job, but what you can do is you can start maybe spending an hour a week on, of your free time and painting, and seeing if you're enjoying this, if you've got any talent in that. Maybe get a course and develop it little by little until you get maybe confidence. This is not the rule by any means. I know people who have been very successful, just dropping their career that they weren't happy and starting something completely new, and they're excelling at it. But it's more for those instances where you're not really sure about whether you actually like it or not. So I'd say go easy and try to start little, because it doesn't have to be huge.
Yeah, I agree with all of it. People don't need to just make massive changes in like a second, because if it took time to get to where you are, it takes time to undo. You can't just you can't just stop something. Like, it's almost like when I suddenly became aware of everything. I literally cleared my whole room out. I went from having a cluttered room with drawers full of shit. It was just clutter. Okay, I cleared every drawer. I binned it all, and I started again. So I suppose I'm an exception where I just jumped in and just sort of literally went from 0 to 100 because I knew where I was going, and I just removed everything in my room, and I was just left with the TV. No, just a bed. I mean, just a bed, right? But for people who are kind of on the journey where they're just becoming spiritually aware, you will find that you will suddenly relapse back to comfort if you just make massive changes because you'll scare the fuck out of yourself. If you suddenly quit your job because you've heard that if you quit your job and believe in the power of the mind, then you're going to get a new job, and it doesn't happen in the time you think, you're going to shit yourself and you're going to get your job back and you're never going to lose it again. So you got to do things slowly so you can see change, but it's not having a massive impact on your life if it goes south, basically, if it doesn't go the way you wanted. So it's all to do with like small steps. If the world's created in small steps and trees grow in small steps, we got our job and went to school in small steps. Everything happens in small steps. Just because you could end it overnight doesn't mean you could or should. It goes up the same time. It's like you walk up a mountain. It takes the same time as it takes to go down. Maybe a little longer going up because it's like you're worn out, but it takes time going up and it takes time to go down. So yeah, people will need to, if they're going to make change, do it bit by bit. Sort of do it, step back and see what happens. Do it, step back, see what happens. And before you know it, you've gone forward so far without even realizing because you've done it
Yeah,
gradually. And that this
yeah,
massive step and change doesn't seem like it was big at all.
yeah. But another thing that I would like to mention is that, even if you make a bigger step, right? Oftentimes people are very afraid of making a mistake, and it's true that some mistakes can have a very large impact on your life and a long-term impact. But I think one of the core principles of Stoicism, which is a philosophy that lasted for over 400 years and has recently seen like a renaissance in this culture. I think one of the core tenets, if I could sort of summarize it, would be that regardless of what happens, it's gonna be okay. We're gonna cope with it. It may not be brilliant. It may not be it may not be caviar and champagne, but at the end of the day, things are gonna be okay. You're gonna find ways to cope. People are very adaptive and persevere animals. We find ways to survive. We find ways to cope, especially in these sort of situations when we're challenged the most. Actually, these sort of situations really force us to adapt and show courage and show creativity in how we actually behaving and how we're making a living, how we're treating others, etc. So regardless of what happens, things are going to be okay. So you should maybe approach life from this perspective of experimentation is okay, and you should probably encourage it, because what a dull life would it be to just do one safe thing, or maybe like be so slow in making a change that by the end of it, you didn't even get to become the painter that you wanted to become. You have to always take into account the fact that time is limited, and your life may end at any moment, right? I think it was Seneca who said before he was actually right before he was executed, his famous last words were to his crying wife, "Don't." I think I'm gonna butcher this quote, but it goes something like this: "Why are you crying when the whole life is sort of calling for tears?" Right? So in a way that it doesn't make sense to cry a specific moment in time and, you know, feel sorry for a specific moment, because in a way we're sort of doomed from the start. You know, we're all mortal and we've got a very limited amount of time here. So instead what you can do is you can make the best out of things, right? The situation, whether it's a good or bad situation, really depends on your perspective and how you interpret it.
I got two questions that came to my head while she was speaking. Number one, do you think like, say, 1,000 years ago, right, when there was small tribes and, like, say, cavemen or local people, what do you reckon the suicide rate was for humans, say, thousands of years ago? Obviously, there was always people trying to kill other people, like with horses and swords and shit like that, and chopping off your head and stuff. But how many people killed themselves because they couldn't cope with the pressure of society, which ultimately would be, I suppose, getting up, digging, and eating and drinking? Like, I think that people only kill themselves because they're trapped in today's society, which is man-made. It's like it's not natural. They feel trapped within because what they feel and see within is different to the outside, and they're trapped. But it's all man-made. So if you go back in time where there was none of this pressure, I wonder what the suicide rate was, and why would they feel the need to kill themselves? Because you wouldn't be trapped. You just get up, find food, drink, and sleep. Another thing that came to my head was, let's just say that your mum or whatever's downstairs right now and she's hearing you speak. Obviously, she brought you up and you're living your own life, and she doesn't see every side to you, just like our parents, just like we don't know our parents' life. They have their own life, and it's like, wow, I never knew that my mum was like this, or she used to do this. But it's like, well, why would you think she did? Because she's her own person still. Just had a thought. Your mum can hear you. She's probably not even there, but she can hear you talking about all your knowledge. What is she thinking, listening to you? You're speaking about all this stuff, and she's like, I didn't teach him this. I didn't know he knew this stuff. What's she thinking? Like, that's amazing. Can I put that into my life? He's a smart person. Or is it not relevant because her job is to teach you her knowledge, and that's it? It's not our job to go back in time and teach all of our ancestors what they should have done. You only learn from moving forward. So it's your job to teach your kids, but not necessarily your job to teach your mum. Although you can teach her this knowledge, and she probably will learn like my mother did. That's not how it works. But it just fascinated me how, if she's hearing you and you don't know she's there, and you might never know that she can hear you, but how she sees you differently based on the knowledge that you know and how amazing it is. Does that make sense? It just came into my head.
It does, it does. So I'll start with your first question about the suicide rates. Obviously, it's very hard to measure because it depends on really how far in the past do you go. If it would be, say, you know, I don't know, 100,000 years, a hunter-gatherer era, who knows? We don't really have data on that. If it's a bit closer to our times, like say maybe, I don't know, Roman times, I would argue that perhaps there were either the same amount or maybe even more suicides than there are right now.
Really?
Because
Really?
because suicide was, well, first of all, you mentioned that there wouldn't be this sort of man-made pressure of life, but I would argue that there was actually a lot of man-made pressure. I mean, look at made pressure in Roman times. You're a slave, you've got a very tough life ahead of you, consisting of work and you know, all sorts of violence, and it is honestly not a great life. But even in this sort of situation, philosophy such as Stoicism was actually quite useful to people, and a lot of slaves were actually Stoic, because the reason was, again, that our life is temporary. You should make the best out of it, regardless of what it is. Even if the situation is bad, you can you can kill yourself. Like, that was pretty much the idea, that there's nothing wrong in killing yourself if the situation becomes too hard to manage. I think another one of the Stoics, I think it was I think it was Seneca again. It was saying that, don't you see the path? Don't you see the answer? It lays just at the, at the end of your wrist, just cutting them off, and you'll be free, essentially. So suicide was, I think, much more acceptable than it is nowadays. It was an honorable thing in a way to do, sort of, again, giving you the sort of sense of autonomy in that you've got only one thing that you're really in control, which is your life. And, if you wish to, you can take it away. That's one thing that nobody can really force you. Nobody has this sort of control. Like, people can take control of your physical body, they can put you in prison, they can force you to be a slave. But then at the end of the day, you can sort of end your life with dignity. So from that perspective, I would say maybe considering again that life wasn't as brilliant as it's depicted in movies back in those days, I would assume that a lot of people would choose that path. I think nowadays surviving is actually very easy, which again, we forget about how bad things were. We really don't even have a sense of how bad things were. I mean, an average person living now is better off, like an average person in the West, I would say, is much better off than, say, a 16th century king, based on how many, services, utilities, and all sorts of goods that you have access to. I mean, even things like running hot water, right? A functioning toilet, things that you can really take for granted, that were accessible only to royalty back in the day. So life wasn't as brilliant as it's depicted in the Gladiator, even though it may have been simpler, right? Because you didn't have all these societal pressures. You weren't aware of what's happening in other countries most of the time, so you wouldn't think about these things. You would just think, you would be more in the present, I suppose. But then again, if a drought strikes your village and all of your harvests are gone and you're facing famine, in that case, I would assume, maybe a lot of people would choose taking their own life as opposed to slowly dying with that. Now, to sort of change the notion a little bit, because it really things have gotten a bit dark here, I will answer your second question, which is about my mom and parents in general. I think our parents are no different to us in a way that they are also susceptible to all sorts of biases. And when they see us, they probably see their children. It's to them, we're always going to be that little kid who they taught how to use the potty and how to use the spoon. Right? They don't care that you're an adult who's working and paying taxes, right? You're still their kid, and they still want the best of you. So they think that they've got good information, or they think that you're doing a mistake. They will try to sort of teach you. And this can be very difficult because what your parents think is best for you can really differ to what is actually best to you. Your parents want safety for you, they want comfort, they want you to not risk. That's why in a lot of countries there's this sort of prevalent push from parents to take these sort of safe careers, such as like a lawyer or a doctor or an engineer, because this is sort of mentality of the Great Depression. When the Great Depression strikes, these are the careers that can sort of keep you afloat, right? A doctor is a doctor, regardless of whether there's a recession or not. But on a personal level, you may be much better off risking it and becoming like a very good painter, really passionate with your craft, taking great pleasure in doing what you're doing, and at the same time using that passion, maybe that interest, to turn this into a business that will make you much more satisfied in the long term, right? But for parents, that, like, they don't see that, right? What they see is that their son is dropping out of whatever good paying job they've got to pursue this sort of hobby right, for no reason. Like it's very difficult to say who's right or wrong in this situation because it really depends on the situation and the context. But it's noteworthy to sort of think about it in the sense that parents are also people, and they just want the best to us, the best for us. Whether that's really the best is again subject to discussion, depending on the situation. I guess to people who are dealing with this situation, and I'm dealing it myself all the time because my mom is she's got a very hard character, I would say. She always knows best, right? Um, so there are ways to circumvent that. You can disagree without being disagreeable. Something that a great negotiator, Chris Voss, um, famously said. He said that if you learn the art of disagreeing without being disagreeable, like you open one of the key learnings of negotiation is how to say no
Hang on,
without.
explain what you mean by that. Disagree without being disagreeable.
So, for example, you can straight away say no when somebody says, do. A good example would be with kids, right? I've got nephews. They're now a bit older, but back in the day when they were a bit younger, my brother would tell them, you should eat carrots, eat the carrots and la la la. And they would say, no, we don't want to eat that. And you could disagree with that, saying like, no, you need to eat the carrots, right? That's it. That's the firm answer that I give you. You have no leverage, no room to say anything about it. And if you've dealt with kids, that most likely that won't work because kids don't have all these, you could say, patterns ingrained by the society and the culture and the teachings that we learn at school of, you shouldn't do this or you shouldn't do that. They will just say things as they are. You're telling them to do something that they don't really understand why they should do it, and they just don't want to do it. That's it. So it's hard to disagree with them. But another approach, without saying straight no, what you can do is provide a different alternative to them, which would still sort of achieve your target, right? So you're sort of disagreeing with them saying, no, I'm not going to eat carrots, but you're doing it in a way that gives them sort of freedom to choose, right? So a different way to say how to eat carrots would be framing. You could say, well, what would you like to eat? Would it be carrots or would it be tomatoes, right? A choice. Now, actually in charge of something, they can make an independent decision. They can make a choice of what they want to eat. And again, they will say, no, I don't want either. But you're increasing the chances that you will have a successful negotiation with your kid because you're giving them some options, right? There's many other ways to do it. Just one example. It's like finding clever ways to frame the negotiation in a favorable way for yourself, without making the other party feel like they're being pushed, if you know what I mean.
Essentially, that's just mind manipulation, hypnosis, mind control. It's what magicians do, and they put things in your mind through words where you think like you're saying it because you wanted it and you're in control, but he said it in a way that he made you think about that, so you own that thing when actually it was him put that in your mindset. It's almost like not asking for a promotion, but asking the questions around the promotion. Like, I'm thinking about getting another job. I'm looking for a job with more pay, or I want my own office. And the boss is thinking, well, if you get promoted, you'll have your own office, you'll get more pay. And, things like that. You say the things around it, but not directly what you're getting at. And he's putting that all together as a assumption of promotion. And he says, have you ever thought about a promotion? And then he gives you the promotion. So yeah, I call that just mind manipulation. Essentially, that's a great negotiator, where you flip the cards and get them to offer you a deal in the car because you're waiting for them to offer you the deal, whereas he wants you to say, I want to buy the car now, so he doesn't have to negotiate a deal down. But if you sort of linger around and wait for them to say, so do you want the car? Don't know. It's tricky. It's just, the price is a bit too much. Well, I'll give you a discount. It's sort of like the person who makes a first move loses. Have you heard that in negotiation? If you make whoever speaks first, that's it. Whoever speaks first loses because you feel like you have to lead the conversation, and now you're leading it and he's answering it, so he's counteracting every move. So now it's like, well, I keep hitting the tennis ball over the court. He whacks it back. He keeps whacking it back. I need to surrender. Buy the car or hang up. So again, this thing about disagreeing without being disagreeable, it is interesting. It's not as I thought it was, but yeah, rather than saying bluntly, no, you're wrong, you sort of go round and sort of get there the same way without them realizing you've already got what you want. So now it's like whatever you do doesn't matter because I've already got what I wanted. It's just a very smart way of getting what you want. Disagreeing
It's
without being disagreeable.
another way to look at it. Another way to look at it would be like if you need to go to the dentist, you could go to the dentist with your kids straight away, which is disagreeing, and that's probably not going to work. Or you could go to the dentist whilst you're driving through an ice cream shop, right? You're still going to the dentist. You're just taking a different route, maybe a bit longer, but ultimately more successful. So
Yeah, very true.
it is true. It is true that it's a bit about mind manipulation, and business people and sales people they got all sorts of tactics to make you say yes. Actually, an interesting tactic which I've read about in the book by the negotiator that I've mentioned earlier, Chris Voss. He's got a brilliant book called Never Split the Difference. And he himself is an FBI leading terrorist negotiator. So he would be sent if somebody got kidnapped and their life was under threat. He would be sent there to negotiate for their life. So the guy really has a good sense of what he's talking about in terms of negotiation. And now he's helping businesses to negotiate as well. So actually, in his view, you shouldn't aim for a yes. You should aim for a no, which is a bit counterintuitive, but very interesting tactic indeed. I'm yet to use the knowledge that I've gotten from reading that book, but certainly something that maybe some of your listeners would be interested in.
So essentially, what it's saying is that if you aim for a yes, you're on the attack rather than the defensive, right? So because you're on the attack, they're defending. Essentially, it all comes down to one can only be in control, and you both want control. You both want to have it your way, have the ultimate decision. When you go in there for a yes, you're constantly on the churn to saying, like, questioning, open questions. So, do you want this? Can we have this? And you eventually want them to say yes, yes, yes. Set with the belief that they're going to say no, you automatically put yourself on the defense and kind of you show vulnerability and show that you don't really need them, and the psychology of you want to be needed. You want somebody to sell you something because they want you to pay. You want them to want your money, and that feeling of you can't have my money. It's a psychological thing where you go in and you know that you want their money, but you know that they want you to want their money so they can sort of feel like you need them, so they can play games and say, oh yeah, if you come back next week I might have changed my mind. And this person calls you up and they say, have you decided yet? It's that need for a want. And when you're there and the pattern is different, where you've got a salesman who's essentially saying, you're either going to buy it or you're not. I'm just going to sit here and sort of just, if you want it, you don't, no as opposed to a yes. That now they have to sort of lead because essentially, if you want what they're talking, there's no one's. It's like two boxers both on defense. No one's fighting. You need a
And
boxer to
also,
at least throw some punches.
and also over time, I think people have gone a bit more used to, and they sort of they can recognize these tactics. The yes, yes, yes tactic that so many salespeople have, which for any of your listeners who may not know about it, essentially the tactic is the seller will try to make you say yes as many times on things that may not be relevant to the thing that they're selling. Like even things like, oh, it's a great weather today, right? Yes. Are you feeling great today? Yeah, I do. The idea is that the more you say yes, 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 you're more likely to say yes when it actually matters, when it's time to like make this sale. But I think people have gotten a bit, clever, you could say. People have now learned to anticipate these things. They can understand. You can almost feel when you're being like someone's selling something to you, right? You don't even have to say anything. You sort of like, are you trying to sell me something? There's this sort of little hunch that you've got. So I guess to sort of wrap it up, I could say that people, again, they want honesty, right? You want honesty, you want people to not lie, and we really appreciate when people are honest with us. We that's why I guess influencer marketing is so lucrative, right? People like when someone you trust, who's an influential person, recommends you something, you're more likely to buy that thing. I mean, if Oprah recommends a book, that book essentially becomes a bestseller overnight because she's got such a huge following and she's such a reputable person that people trust. She's established a rapport. So I guess in that sense, you want to be honest and you want to have a reputation as a negotiator as being an honest person who wants the best. Because oftentimes you can find a win-win situation. It doesn't have to be a zero-sum game where, I'll sell you some junk that you don't need and get your money. You should aim for a win-win situations where you actually both are better off from the transaction. And then it's just so much easier. Your life becomes so much easier if you're a seller because you get to sell people things that they actually need. You get to improve your reputation as an honest salesperson who actually takes his clients or her clients' best interest. And at the end, the person gets what they want. You actually solve some sort of problem that they've got.
If the statistics of sales, right, is 99 are going to say no, one will say yes, right? Sales is about the pressure. It's not necessarily about the product. It's about who's weaker minded, who gives in to a situation of the most dominant energy, right? The bigger lion will always threaten the small lion, and the small lion will sort of roll over and surrender like a dog. You say, naughty dog, and the dog rolls on its back and surrenders. It's nothing to do with the product. It's to do with who's weaker minded right now, who can't handle pressure and social situations and eye contact. Then you surrender. If, for example, the stats are, 99 will say no and 1 will say yes, there's no need to sell. Just say, look, do you want to buy it? No. Do you want to buy it? No. Do you want to buy it? No. Eventually, out of those 100 people, one will say, fuck me, I've been looking for that. How much? 20 quid, done. If the outcome's the same of trying to sell something, trying to get them to buy something they don't want to buy, and always say 3 out of 100 or whatever buy it, what does that tell you? You could save yourself all day just saying, do you want it? Nope. Do you want it? Nope. Do you want it? Nope. You could do that to 500 people in a day. You've got 5 sales in a day, as opposed to spending all day going through those 99 people who are going to say no to get to that one. Like people have always said to me, you'd be a great salesman. And I know that. I can control your mind, I can sell, I can use psychology, I know it all. But I connect you on a human level, which is, you don't want this bullshit. I could force you to buy this without even realizing. And I don't feel, that doesn't make me feel good. The fact that it's almost like I'm exploiting my confidence and my ability to fool you as a nice person, which I am, and see your weakness and vulnerability, and I'm exploiting it. That's what salesman's is. You are finding weakness in them to try and force something upon them, and that doesn't make me feel good. Hence why I never went into sales, because I can't sell something I know that person isn't going to use. That's just not me. Again, I'll get 5 in a day. If I just went, do you want to buy it? Nope. Do you want to buy it? Do you want to buy it? Nope. One will buy it out of 100. Because, for example, was around the other day and she said she wanted this stupid mop that has a light bulb. I'm fantastic. Here we are. You know what I mean? So to me, you don't need to sell anything. You just need to be smart and just know that somebody's going to buy a carrot that glows in the dark.
It's true, but at the same time, it's like in reality, is a bit more difficult than that. Like I had my fair share of sales jobs, and a lot of them are actually commission based. So the people you've described, that 1%, they're incredibly rare. Of course, depending on what you're selling, um, if you're selling something that is a cool new thing that everybody wants, well, congratulations, you've got a great success. But oftentimes you'll find yourself that there's this sort of lucrative commission that you can get, but these aren't the things that most people need. I'm talking about like your life insurance things or your solar panels, whatever, whatnot, right? Things that people don't usually think about when they wake up in the morning and like, oh, this is like a great day to buy some solar panels or like get my life insured. So they're more on the fence, right? But this is where the money is for a lot of these salespeople. So I think what they've come to realize and what they're training salespeople to do is how to get those people who are not very certain whether they want or not. How do you actually get them into, like, converse them into a sale, right? Because then you're commission based. You want to make money, and it's right what you said. Like, sometimes it can be quite unethical. I just remember the story that my friend told me. He's an engineer, but as many students, he had a shitty, part-time job that he worked whilst he was at uni, and it was telemarketing. He was calling people on the phone, and he was trying to sell them something they don't really need. And he told me the story of how he called his grandma and he was trying to sell her this, like, a Roomba vacuum cleaner, right? And it was an expensive vacuum cleaner. And that poor lady, she like many elderly people, she probably felt lonely, and she was just happy that someone called her. She wanted this, human conversation.
Did the
So she was
grandma know
actually,
it was her grandson or not?
no, he wasn't her grandson. He was just calling random people, and just so
Oh,
happened that he called his grandma. And the grandma was
oh,
so happy that somebody called her, because a
wow.
lot of old people are very lonely, unfortunately. So she was very happy to hear, to speak with someone. She was ready to buy that expensive, like, Roomba, out of her very small pension. And like, what happened was, like, my friend is an ethical guy, so he sort of realized the situation, and he started to actually negotiate her to not buy the Roomba. So actually, the roles reversed. He was like, "Oh, I really want to buy this, right? It sounds so good." And he was like, "Well, do you actually need it? Do you really need it, etc.,
And he didn't
etc."
know that it was his own grandma.
No, it wasn't his grandma. That's the thing. It was just a random
Oh,
grandma. But he
oh.
felt so bad. It felt like exploitation because he understood that she's just so lonely, that she's just ready to buy this vacuum cleaner that she completely doesn't need out of a small pension that she already doesn't have. So he actually said this. He said, like, look, um, I'm not actually allowed to tell you this, but you shouldn't get this because of these interest rates and such and such. And it seems like you don't have that much money, so you probably shouldn't have this. And she really appreciated that. They had a nice conversation. And that same day, he left that job. It was just too much. He
Listen,
couldn't
that
deal
is
with it.
exactly the same reason why I could never go into sales, because I'd be performing at such a high level of mind manipulation. I'd spot the weak instantly, and I would get what I want. That's not me as a human. I want to nurture and care and love and empower people. And selling is exploiting people's weakness and vulnerability and loneliness and desperation and need for connection. I couldn't do it. And if all the boss just
It can
wants is
be.
numbers,
It can be. You're right in a way that, again, it comes back to the conversation that we had earlier about the conscious consumption, right? A lot of sales that we have nowadays is the unconscious consumption. It's mindless consumption. It's creating a story or narrative that makes people believe they want things that they don't really need, right? So if you were a conscious consumer, it would be very easy to sell things because you understand things are good to you. Here's a person selling, I don't know, ketogenic smoothies, which are good for my health. I'll buy one, of course. Why not?
condoms.
Um, Problem is that a lot of things aren't, things that are really good for you. Oftentimes you don't really need them, but that's what the economy runs on. And It can be like it doesn't always have to be unethical, right? Sometimes it can be just changing the perspective of people, or showing them a better way. Like for example, if you're selling electric cars, right, you're not necessarily a bad seller who is just trying to, trick people into buying an expensive car. It can be changing someone's perspective of, well, uh, is this thing important to you? Is climate change important to you? Yes, it is. Well, what are you doing to fight it? Well, I'm doing this and this and this. Well, do you know that your car is contributing to climate change, etc., etc.? And you can sort of give people information which may not be accessible to them, or maybe show them that information a better story, which makes them understand the situation, which makes them want a thing which is a net good for them or their society, right? So it doesn't always have to be bad. It really depends on the context of where it's implemented.
Yeah, true. But as a general perspective, your aim is to sell, not to sort of give people knowledge about how, well, actually, that young guy on the phone who tried to sell me a car, he's actually made me think about electric cars. Whole point is to sell. And if you're not selling, then you're not going to be working there. And you're just there to make the boss money. Like, that's the thing. I believe that if people are selling, they are not. Again, people who sell, I believe, are people who want to have the good life. But the fact is, you're working for someone, which means if you need to have a certain in order to create the life that you want, a leadership mindset. You can't be told like what to do. And if you're told that, you know, you got to knock on 99 doors to get one, and you believe that and you're doing it, and you don't have the brain that says this is nonsense because you're doing all this work for one person. There's a guy who's got 10 people doing the same thing. That boss is making, say, £1 from 10 different people, and collectively they've knocked, say, 100 doors, right? So the boss is making, say, £5 at the end of the day, and that person's making 20p. It's a fool's game. It's like the boss can't be bothered to go and make shit happen himself. He'll get all these other young, desperate people who want to have the good life to do it themselves. And it's the same pattern. They all go in their groups, they all start calling and knocking on doors, and they realise this is bollocks. This is bollocks. I'm making £6 an hour. It's stressful. I'm not getting any love and affection, and they leave. So the boss just recruits another person. And again, the other person, I want to be successful. I can sell. Prove to me. He goes out and does it. He makes, say, knocks on 200 doors and he gets 2 people. That's £2. Well, the boss has got 5 people on the go. He always makes £10, say, a week, that boss, because when that one person does it, they make £1, they fuck off. So it's a cycle of it's almost like it's an illusion. Everyone realizes eventually that this is nonsense. I'm just making that guy £1, right? And every other person's making that guy £1. And that person realizes this is shit money, especially if it's commission. If it's a salary, that's different because now you just have to do your job and it's not about the commissions. But the reason why it's always commission is because the money that he'd have to pay in salary to you is what he's getting himself. So again, the fool who believes they can sell and, oh, I'm different, I can sell. It's the same pattern no matter what country you're in. A young, ambitious person who wants to sell, it's nonsense. It's like trying to convince someone that a duck is a dog. No one's going to
Yes.
believe it. One deaf person, blind person might believe it. Oh, I've not got my
Oh,
glasses on. Oh, I'll take your
you'd be
word. You're telling me it's a
surprised.
duck.
You'd be surprised. In one
Some
job.
experience, by the way, because I used to do all this shit, by the way. That's why I say
I,
this.
I can notice that because I can relate to this as well. I used to do door-to-door selling as well. Again, whilst
Oh, fuck this. This
yeah,
fucking boss saying it's a numbers game, law of average. Fuck off.
True. It's a very competitive field. I feel like the retention rates in these positions are very low. Like people come and go every day, and because it's a low-skilled job, you could say, everybody can talk to people. They have enough applicants. They've got enough people to sort of replace the ones who leave. So at the end of the day, what you have is the ones who actually stay there for a long time. They're willing to do things that maybe other people are not, or maybe
No,
they've
no,
got
no.
very good skills.
just on that thing. The one that stays there long enough becomes the manager and manages the people on a salary, right? Salary, recruit. So again, no one's making any money from the sales. The boss is getting £1 on every fucking person that is there for a week until they fuck off. And then the person who's dumb enough to stay there becomes manager. He's on a salary, so he's not selling. So again, it's just this illusion bullshit thing. It's almost like, I mean, it's funny. It's like all the fish go up to the worm and they realise, don't think I'm a twat, mate. You know, if I bite this worm, you're gonna hook me up. And they sort of they swim off, and another one comes past. Don't be silly. And then another one comes past. And eventually, you've got this dumb worm like, oh, a worm. I'm gonna bite this, right? It's just this cycle of sort of the dumb one bites it. The dumb one stays there long enough. If I just keep going, 99% say no. I've got to get through the no's to get to a yes. No problem, madam. You have a lovely day. Hello there. Do you want to buy this thing? No problem, madam. They told me if I keep going, this fucking boss, man, he's not even in the office. He's like, this dumb fucker's been here for 6 years, still thinking he's going to get 1 out of 99. I'll make him manager so I can go and live in Thailand on my boat because this dumb fucker's going to do much more. So out of my £1,000,000 I've made from all these young fuckers thinking they can sell, I'll just give this guy, say, 2 grand. I'm still making 900,000 quid, but this dumb fucker's doing it for 2 grand. Again, he recruits all these young, ambitious people like I was, and I'm realizing no matter what industry you go in, it's all the same. All these like Tai Lopez courses and how to get rich online, stock market drop shipping, how to beat the roulette, sell products. It's the cycle that the only person who makes the money is the person who's got the course. You're only going to make the money if you create the course. You buy into all these courses, you'll realize that that course is a stepping stone for you to realize that it's all bollocks and you've got to create your own. I was the same. I've chosen all these different courses. I realized the only way to do it is what I'm doing now. Go and public speak, sell the packages about how to enlighten yourself. Because 99% are going to buy into it and think, yes, change my life. 1% actually do change their life and they make you rich. Unfortunately, in order to change one person's life, you've got to put it out to 100 people. So yes, you're kind of knowingly wasting 99% of people's time, but in order to get that 1%, you have to do it. So again, you realize that you're not going to make money through buying packages. You have to create them.
I completely agree. I'm very skeptical of any sort of money-making course. Essentially, all of them, especially if they charge to teach you. I think if your earnings depend on people buying your course, like, or if you're making money by selling people course on how to make money, then it's kind of like a catch-22, isn't it? You're sort of, you don't have the money yourself, but you're selling a course to other people to make money. So instead, you could just sell a course of how how to create a Ponzi scheme. So that would be a bit more truthful, I guess. But I quite like what you're doing. I like that you're doing a podcast because it's a nice long-term, you could say, leveraged way to make income. The podcast can make you money whilst you sleep. It has 0 marginal replication costs. That's a term that I've learned, which means that it's just ones and zeros. It doesn't cost you anything to create 1 million copies of this podcast and have them running 24/7 with millions of people watching it simultaneously, right? I mean, maybe there would be some infrastructure costs to put it on servers and such, but in general, like, it's not the same as printing books, right? Or selling out events in stadiums. You can do it very cheaply, 0 marginal replication costs. So it's actually one of the better ways to make income nowadays. Another example would be YouTubing, for example. Again, making YouTube video. You make a YouTube video today, 10 years from now, if people are watching, it's still making you money, right? So that's very good investment. You could say investment of your time. Code also is like that, because if you make an app that is sort of successful and people want to use it, again, you need to make it once. well, in reality, you make it once and then you probably make lots of fixes and improvements to make it better. But like you make the sort of initial leap, initial lump of time that you invest, and then it doesn't matter whether it's like 100 people or 1,000 people or 1,000,000 people, right? You sort of your earnings, they grow almost exponentially because it doesn't cost you for people to download that app, right? So each user is like a net profit for you after a certain threshold. So that's a good one.
That's very interesting. We'll wrap this up there, right? It's an hour and 40.
Yeah.
I can't believe it's flown past. You were like,
yeah, I was about to say we should end on a high note.
Yeah.
After discussing all of these sales tactics and mind manipulation, let's end on a high note.
Do you want to plug anything whilst you're here? Any condoms you're selling online, condom company you want to promote or anything, or social media, podcasts? No?
No, nothing that I have of myself. I mean, the only thing that I could, I guess, advertise, but I wouldn't even call it advertise. I don't really care if you follow me or not, but it's just there. I've got a Twitter account. You can follow me if you want. It's IAM_Solvi. That's my first name and last name. But what I would advertise really is just great work from other people instead. I would advertise some great books and podcasts. One especially is from Naval Ravikant. He's a philosopher slash entrepreneur from the USA. He's got a bunch of amazing content, which is completely for free. And again, it's teaching people how to take better ownership of their time and how to leverage their time to really become wealthy. And the notion of zero marginal costs I've learned from him as well. So definitely recommend him. Also, there's a great book called Super Thinking, which I'm reading right now. I definitely recommend it. It's by, let me just quickly check. I don't want to misspell this guy's name. It's Gabriel Wiseman, I think. Oh, sorry, Gabriel Weinberg. Sorry. It's a book about mental models. So Gabriel is the founder of DuckDuckGo, the internet browser. And he wrote a book about thinking patterns and how you can think better, how you can detect these, say, biases and flaws in your logic and in your thinking, some of which are biological, some of which are cultural, how you can detect them and how you can think more clearly and make better decisions in your life. So definitely recommend that book. And in general, just, I guess, recommendations would be find smart people who are willing to explore opposing views, who are not entrenched and just gripping their own agendas and their own frame of reference, who are willing to explore other ideas and discuss them. So a lot of thinkers, Sam Harris, I could go on and on, but I think I'll stop here.
All right, I'm going to stop this recording and I'll just say goodbye. Wait there.